Let's get started. I want to welcome everyone here this evening. It is a pleasure to have you join us for kind of I think this is really the third or fourth kind of event in a series of events over the last few days around our theme of ecological art. And this is kind of the final event, so we're grateful that you have hung in there and joined us. Before I introduce our guests, I want to thank and welcome our president, Dr. Anderson, and his wife Vivian, and our provost, Dr. Vilas Prabhu, and his wife. It's a pleasure to have you both here, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. My name is Diane Zimmerman-Umble. I am the Dean of the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences at Millersville. And it is really my pleasure to welcome you to the Ware Center and to this event this evening. And also to introduce our panel. We've had a couple of days of opportunities to interact with several of the people on the panel today, and it's really, truly a privilege to have you with us, and just want to say thank you for being so generous with your time and sharing your interest in your journeys with our students. We're truly grateful. So the panel tonight, Ecological Art, Reconstructing Humanity's Relationships with the Environment, features the Art and Design's 2015 Conrad Nelson Fellow, Patricia Johansson, an internationally known eco-artist, Betsy Damon, physical chemist and Dean Emeritus of the School of Science and Mathematics, Dr. Ed Shane, and curator and philosopher Sue Spade, who is also going to be moderating this evening. So please join me in welcoming to the podium Kirsten Levins from the Philadelphia Art Alliance, who will introduce our panelists and give a little insight into their work. And Kirsten is standing in for her mentor, Christine Philippone, who couldn't be here tonight. And we're proud to say that Kirsten is a graduate of our art design program. So welcome to the podium, Kirsten.
Dr. Christine Philippone, who began organizing this panel a year ago, deeply regrets that she is unable to be here. She had a family health emergency. She has sent the message that she is deeply grateful to the panelists, her colleagues, Professor Lena Brunsey, Professor Brant Schuler, Professor Becky McDonough, Chair Debbie Siegel, and Gloria Mast. I'm Kirsten Levins, recent graduate of Millersville University, and I graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Art and a focus in art history. I'm actively pursuing a graduate degree in art history while working at the Philadelphia Art Alliance. Works like Betsy Damon's Living Water Garden and Johansson's Fair Park Lagoon address water reclamation, land remediation, biodiversity, and urban infrastructure. Spade co-curated the groundbreaking 1992 exhibition Ecovention, which introduced the term ecovention, meaning ecology plus intervention. An artist-initiated project that employs an innovative strategy to physically transform the local ecology. Ecoventions always involve collaboration with scientists, example hydrologists, biologists, and chemists, landscape architects, and community members, in which the artist functions as creative catalyst and principal designer. The materials of ecological art extend beyond traditional marble and bronze to encompass living plants and microbes, temperature and wind, water and soil, debris and contaminants. With roots in the environmental movement in the 1960s, which encouraged a conception of human beings as components of an integrated ecosystem, ecoventions and ecological art are motivated by the goal to improve humanity's prospects for attaining a sustainable future. The panel is organized by the Department of Art and Design at Millersville University as part of the One Book, One Campus schedule of events for the year 2015 and 2016. It is supported by the One Book, One Campus Committee, the Department of Art and Design, and the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. Before I introduce the panelists, I would like to briefly introduce the work of artist Betsy Damon. Betsy Damon is an internationally recognized artist whose work with water, site-specific sculptures, and performance has received widespread acclaim and publication. Since 1985, Damon has focused on water and ecological issues. In the United States, Damon has worked with groups across the country, bringing together arts, science, and citizens for water remediation. Damon is currently working on Living Waters of Larimer, a fresh infrastructure, a project to transform a neighborhood in Pittsburgh, PA, through equitable repurposing of captured rainwater. She has worked with urban design teams in China, notably contributing the wetland system design in the Beijing Olympic Park. Damon's concern for the environment arose from her strongly held feminist beliefs. Her early feminist works were street performances centered, she explained, on community, women, and rituals. For her performance, The 7,000-Year-Old Woman, in which she channeled the multi-breasted goddess Diana of Ephesus that had come to her in dreams, she punctured each of the 420 small bags attached to her body, slowly draining them of flour as she walked in a spiral, gaining through the process a sensation of the dimension of women's oppression. Damon's activist performance works centering on the subjugation of women began to compass the exploitation of the environment by the mid-1980s. For her performative sculpture, A Memory of Clean Water, for example, she and her collaborators called attention to problems of toxic water due to upstream mining and agricultural pollution by a 250-foot casting of a dry riverbed along Castle Creek in Castle Valley, Utah. She continued to create sculpture centered on the process of making and on the performative acts of her collaborators, empowered with a political and social agency gleaned from feminism. Damon then founded the nonprofit organization Keepers of the Water, through which she promotes environmental education, ecological planning, community projects, and advocacy worldwide. In 1998, Damon created the award-winning Living Water Garden in Sichuan, China, a 6-acre urban park that has become an icon for natural water cleaning systems. Collaborating with scientists, landscape artists, engineers, government officials, and community members, she created a fully functioning water treatment plant, a giant sculpture in the shape of a fish, a symbol of regeneration in Chinese culture, located on the polluted Fu and Nan rivers. It is also a living environmental education center and a refuge for wildlife plants. Each day, 200 cubic meters of polluted river water moves through a natural and artistic treatment system of ponds, filters, and flow forms, making the process of cleaning water visible. After coursing through the natural treatment system, the water emerges clean enough to drink. This amount of water is not enough to affect the river water quality as a whole. Its purpose is teaching and inspiration. Also joining us tonight is Dr. Edward Shane. Dr. Shane is a physical chemist whose entire career has been in the academic community, with 28 years of teaching in liberal arts colleges and 10 years as Dean of the School of Science and Mathematics, Millersville University of Pennsylvania. He began his research on the study of atmospheric chemical reaction, but broadened his research interests to include an emphasis on environmental research when he began college teaching. He has been a member of the Sierra Club since 1976 and is currently convener for the Environmental Concerns Committee at the Lancaster Monthly Meeting. Shane has conducted research with undergraduates on bioconcentration of heavy metals in the environmental impact of a coal-fired plant on the Missouri River in Iowa, water quality studies, and the binding of polyaromatic hydrocarbons to humic acids in water. He is an outdoor enthusiast who enjoys hiking and gardening. His interest in arts comes from a 49-year marriage to Carol, an abstract painter and former art professor. And at last, I would like to introduce Belgian-based philosopher Sue Spade, who will provide a brief introduction to the work of Patricia Johansson if you were not lucky enough to be with us last night for an excellent, in-depth discussion of her work presented by the artist herself. Remember that Patricia's work is also on view, now on exhibition, Patricia Johansson's Environmental Remedies, Restoring Soil and Water at Eckert Gallery in the Winter Center on the main campus, curated by Sue Spade and coordinated by Gloria Mast. Exhibition catalogs designed by David Ramsey and including lengthy and incisive essay on Johansson's work are available for sale. Spade is the author of 3 books on environmental art, including A Field Guide to Patricia Johansson's Works, built, proposed, collected, and published from 2012. Former executive director of the Contemporary Museum in Baltimore, Spade has curated well over 100 exhibitions from museums, sculpture parks, university galleries, commercial galleries, and alternative venues. Spade is associate editor of the Aesthetical Investigations, the journal for the Dutch Society of Aesthetics. Her most recent philosophical work addresses philosophy of urban farming, biodiversity as a bioindicator for aesthetic engagement, posthumous artistic production, and philosophy of curatorial practice. Please join me in welcoming Sue Spade.
Thank you, Kristen. Spending too much time listening and not thinking about getting ready here. Okay, So I'm not going to give so much an overview of Patricia's career, but just a sort of summary of what I think are the key ideas in her work. So although there are several books that address Patricia Johansson's life work, and I discuss her art in 4 distinct books, I remain dazzled by her art's vast range of ideas, contexts, and approaches. I feel certain that I will never stop learning from her work. In preparing a talk on the groundbreaking scientific ideas underlying her 150 1969 house and garden drawings, a lecture that coincided with her 2013 museum survey in Holland, I realized that I could have organized at least 10 completely different talks concerning this singular body of work. I've never heard of any other artist whose output in a single year could double as a collection, enabling curators to tease out an array of exhibition themes from so many angles. As I note in the catalog essay that accompanies this exhibition, water has been a central theme in her work for over 4 decades. Given that her work is focused on enhancing the quality of life for all sentient beings, water's centrality is hardly surprising. 2 key and possibly surprising attributes of Johansson's artworks are functionality and practicality. Most of us have been taught that the very feature that distinguishes... Am I not loud enough? Oh, there's someone going like this in the back. Okay, I'm sorry. Most of us have been taught that the very feature that distinguishes art from everything else is its impracticality. In fact, art is especially valued for its being immune from the practical realm. If something is impractical, we imagine it defying consumption or exploitation. But if the art market has taught us anything, it is that even the least practical artwork, such as an Abex painting or a Jeff Koons bunny, will eventually command consumption, if not exploitation. One could argue that it is not art per se that defies consumption, but things like avant-garde artworks that are especially difficult to grasp. And even though we notice loads of identifiable things like rivers and butterflies and worms and lizards and mountains and flowers in Johansson's works, how she envisions these elements interacting to enhance our world is far from straightforward, especially if you are unfamiliar, as most of us are, in the latest trends in green infrastructure. Again, this is what makes her functional proposals art. Ecological strategies such as reducing the turbidity of waterways, mitigating roof runoff, or cleansing stormwater locally, which the world is only now beginning to accept as possible and beneficial, were already visible in her work over 4 decades ago. Problem is, too few knew how to recognize what was going on in her drawings. Despite her drawings' practicality and functionality, another of her work's attributes is mystery. I always wonder how she knew such and such back then. For example, in 1969, she proposed a butterfly garden by situating gardens along the monarch butterfly's migration route, which weren't actually discovered by scientists until a few years later. When in the gallery, look closely, and you will discover her myriad proposals for creating wildlife corridors, building water-cleansing skyscrapers and vertical farms, remediating acid mine drainage, implementing urban dams and spillways to mitigate flooding by improving absorption and diverting water away from living spaces. Most important, several of our commission proposals for large-scale public works have been or are in the process of being built in Dallas, Texas, San Francisco, California, Seoul, Korea, Petaluma, California, Salt Lake City, and Scranton, Pennsylvania, transforming the formerly merely conceivable into the now everywhere possible. In Europe, where I live, the EU has set aside 50 million euros to fund green infrastructure in 2016. Whether EU MPs know it or not, her approach to resolving and minimizing ecological disasters is on the brink of becoming de rigueur. Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to wear a different hat and be the moderator. So I want to start. One of the things that is critical probably to everyone in this room, not just artists and scientists, is community. And I think that I want to start with a question that I'm beginning to work off of Christine's questions, which she put together and are very good. So let's talk about the role of community in this kind of work. I mean, it was already discussed that there's a very collaborative, there's scientists, there's politicians, they're very collaborative, but I don't think community was necessarily on that list. What that list comprised were the people it takes to get these things done. But community often includes people that aren't helping you, but are there and are present even if they're in the background. Does anyone want to address the role of community?
Okay. Well, in many ways, I think community is everything. So I'll just, a couple of things. A long time ago, I was teaching an art and activism class in San Antonio, and one of my students did the first San Antonio river cleanup as her thing. That has become the community activity in San Antonio that has informed them from ever on. I did a workshop, and the first group to save the Edwards Aquifer. The Edwards Aquifer is now the only national aquifer that's a park. So all of these are community activist projects that started somehow from this artist deciding to be an activist. In China, much to everyone's shock, the Living Water Garden, it came about because I got to direct the first public work for the environment in China. The government said to me they thought it was a waste of time and money, but if they liked it, we could go forward. But to get the Living Water Garden actually built, they sent a model around. The community took it around from each little section of the city and exposed the whole idea to everybody in the city. So as far as I can tell, everything that I've ever gotten to do has started with community, and the last thing is Larimer, which is completely dependent on the community learning ecological solutions, the language, the vocabulary, how to read their community according to water flow, not just according to lots. And so community is basic.
Okay, well, actually, when I think of communities, I start with the ecological communities. And basically, I try to create a whole system in any project I do because it lowers the maintenance costs. And so basically, that's where I start. The second community I always think about is children, because if you're really interested in converting people, you want to start with children and nature. And somebody has coined the phrase nature deficit disorder. And so basically, I work also with environmental psychologists now, the ones who work with children, and we try to create projects that will bring children into nature, and Fair Park is a good example of that. And I'm trying to think of how long the project has been there, maybe 30 or 35 years now. And basically, I get letters all the time from mothers and from children who've grown up, who say have become research scientists because of Fair Park. So that's another community I think of. In terms of getting a project built, I think of how you can do that. And so you want to think about all of the constituencies that are out there. When we did the Petaluma project, which is a sewage recycled water facility, basically I was on the value engineering team. We did 7 alternatives. 6 were mechanical systems. The engineers had never done a wetlands treatment facility. So basically the communities I was thinking of there were people who would, the recreational communities, by putting 4 miles of trails into the project, which were on the same footprint as the truck maintenance routes, we were able to show people how they could use the facility. And so I'm basically trying to work all the time with all of the communities that are out there, because in a way, when these infrastructure projects, you're really trying to prove to taxpayers that they can get more for their tax money than just some hunk of concrete or something with a chain link fence around it. So that's how I work with communities.
Do you have an idea of what these ladies do, or are you just only imagining because you haven't really seen pictures?
I saw the pictures last night.
Okay, good. Because then I want to ask the next question. So, when you saw pictures last night, were you thinking about additional roles the scientists could play in this work?
Well, it was obvious that Patricia had integrated scientists into her design and into her work. The term that popped up last night repeatedly was not community, but park. This park, that park. And it was obvious from the photographs of the people there enjoying the parks that the park was very much a part of the community, a part of the city, and that the design had worked. The children who were there at, I'm thinking, I guess, the Dallas, the park in Dallas, they were having a ball, and that was obvious. So the community has come together around the park that Patricia designed. I assume that was the intent, and that's actually what happened.
I could add to it. I think every project has its own, it has its own community complications. And so there, of course, when you're working with ecology, there's many communities. There's the plant community, there's hooking up the water systems, but then there's all the people it takes to do it. And above all, though, it's the community in which it's going to live and be alive with. So, and if they're not there, then something's not right. So it depends on, for me, on scope and who initiated. How did I get into that community? Where did the invitation come from? You know, or was I living there and did it come? But most things come in communities where I'm not living. So then that's building the relationships within that community to make the project sing and play together and work together. The engineers and the plant lives in the community, then, you know, even the wildlife, they've all got to be there at the table. So, and a synergy happens when you create that.
The whole discipline of ecology is a very new discipline, relatively speaking, compared to physics and mathematics and chemistry. Ecology is new. And the reality is that scientists suddenly began to understand the way everything is related to everything else. And what I like about the work that I saw last night that Patricia designed is that everything is related to everything else. Water comes in here, but then it's purified by that plant. And now that the water is purified, now this species starts to appear. And everything is related to everything else. And what I really appreciate is the collaboration between the arts and humanities and the sciences and engineering. It's about time that we begin to realize that we're not doing specialized work, that everything really is teamwork.
Well, I think there's another aspect to this collaboration that's really important, and that's government. Because oftentimes And, I mean, for example, currently Patricia has a piece in Salt Lake City that's just been accepted by City Council, but they're still going to have hearings. And every piece, even if it's done at a university, you have to go through the government of the university. If it's done at a... So one of the things that makes this art really different than other kinds of art projects is not just the artist saying, I want to make it in my studio and I don't care if anyone shows it. It doesn't, you have to, it requires a place and a space and funding and permissions and regulations, all sorts of things that are very different. Does anyone want to tell any different anecdotes about dealing with politicians and trying to get them to support your work or anything like that? Or, I mean, because the community might love it, but if you don't have the support of people that can greenlight your project, it's a different story, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that sounds like an anecdote waiting to happen.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how long, but, you know, the politics of Beijing around the Olympics was pretty stunning. I'll tell one anecdote, though. Myself and another person designed the entire circulating water system for the whole Beijing Olympic venue. Not only the park, but where all the bird's nests and everything was. And however, 2 different districts owned the land. So although our idea was the most economic, would clean the water, would keep everything flowing through several kilometers up and down, and was, I can say, a stunning idea. And it was kept on the table till the very last minute, but the politicians could not agree to share. So it didn't happen. But I could tell a lot of stories like that. There wasn't even, I didn't get to be in the conversation then, but I did in Chengdu, the Living Water Garden, get to be in the conversation. But I got lucky. And the mayor said to the man who, he said, are you willing, the mayor said to the man who was head of the 5-year plan, because the Living Water Garden became part of the 5-year plan. And he said, are you willing to go to jail for this American lady's idea? And the man said yes.
Wow.
And that's an incredible moment. And I never knew that, but when the park was done, I mean, 2/3 of his office wouldn't even say hello to me. It was so dangerous to have a foreigner in the office. I was the first foreigner. And when the park was finally done and working, afterwards, slowly all these stories came out, and I learned about them all. So that's probably my biggest experience. In the States, it's different, but it's not that different. Tricia. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, next question.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so Patricia, I understand that your love of nature inspires the form your works take, and you desire to connect humanity with nature. Was there a specific catalyst that set you on this path to create works that transform our relationship to the non-human environment?
Well, I think that starts very young, and so that's one of my commitments to children. I can remember we lived in a very small apartment in Brooklyn, and so we would go to the park every day. That became our public space, and I can remember at 3 or 4 years old feeding squirrels, and so basically that's why I'm so involved in creating public landscapes as opposed to gallery art. But I mean, I've been involved in nature all my life, since childhood.
And Betsy, I'm not sure, tell me the origin of the Living Garden in China.
I mean, how I got to do it?
Yeah.
Well,
Water.
actually, I decided when I found out that all the water was polluted in Utah, I decided that I didn't want my work to be in a gallery. I wanted my work to contribute and be part of nature. And I just got to do it. Again, it's a much too long a story to tell, but I ended up directing the first public art for water in China in 1995, thanks to an anonymous phone, a bunch of strange things that happened, but I got an anonymous phone call saying, somebody saying they wanted to fund me, they didn't say who they were and they didn't say how much. And I spilled my guts about having brainstormed a Living Yangtze project in China at a conference with Qigong masters and Chinese engineers a year earlier. Well, she gave me the money. And I went to China with $25,000 around my waist and no permission from the government and one name card, and ended up directing this thing, and they broke all their rules to let me do it. And it took me 2 months. And when they took me to see their plans, I went and saw their plans, and I saw this green plan, 19 kilometers of park development, not a movie theater, not a restaurant, not a hotel, nothing. And I really was astonished, and I praised them a lot, and I said, why don't you make a park to teach your citizens how nature can clean water? And they said, can you do that? And I'm telling you, if you had a microscope, every hair in my body was shaking. My entire system was just, and I nodded. And they said, talk for 2 more minutes in rapid Chinese. I didn't understand a word. And they said, we want you to do that. And we want you to not do the performances. So I went back to my room with everybody and I said, oh my goodness, I can do my dream. I mean, I'd been wanting to do this in Minnesota and no one understood what I was saying. And so the next morning I woke up and I said, but we have to finish what we started. Like 25 artists, we've become a gang, we all know each other. They came from all over to China to work on these performance events, and I had really bonded them. And I said, we have to finish what we started. And they said to me, we're very sorry to hear that because we think performance art is a waste of time and money. But we'll watch you very carefully, and if we like what you do, we'll ask you back. So the government was standing on the banks of the river cheering when we started our performance events, and we were on national television for 2 solid weeks. And the upshot of it was, we want this energy and feeling to be permanent in our city. That's what one of the vice mayors said to me at a final dinner. And so I went home and wrote grants, and I got turned down, and I got so mad at the turn down letter that I put everything on a charge card and went back and designed the park. And it's quite a saga, really. So that's what happened. That's how I got to do it. And it was just thanks to that one man who said he would take it into his office. And they gave me everything for free possible, and then I got a lot of grants, and I went home $25,000 in debt when the park was done 2 years later. But the Premier of China opposed it, but the city built it anyway. He opposed it. Okay. So that's sort of like our vice president opposing it. So then he came to see it and he said, this is the best thing that's happened to China. You gave us a future. So from then on, every mayor came. There's wetlands, and there's wetland cleaning systems in many universities, and the people that worked with me have gone on and are implementing every ecological solution they can possibly do, but you will never hear about this in American press. So, yeah, I had quite an adventure.
So, Adam, I'm curious to hear about, we heard about their commitment to art and nature. What is your commitment to the environment been? Is there a way to articulate that, other than your membership in the Sierra Club?
Yeah, I suppose so. As a scientist, I'm in the lab. I'm working in the lab. So for fun, I'm a gardener. There's some other gardeners.
Do you food? Is it edible plants or just only
Flowers, mostly flowers, some food, but mostly flowers. So I do that for fun, and that gets me out and about. But being in the Sierra Club and going with folks like Sierra Club people, you're out in the environment, you're learning about the environment, you're enjoying the environment. The environments that these women have created obviously would compete with nature. They are natural. So I do that. This will happen to the students out there. This will happen to you as you go through your education. You'll find you'll start in one direction and move in another. I started out studying atmospheric reactions of ions and molecules and ended up down in creeks and rivers, collecting fish and studying what is happening around me because that's what I had access to at that point in my life.
I don't know if you are aware, but there are some polemics around this kind of art. It seems like everyone would be in favor of it, but some artists have gone on record of, well, I don't think recently, but certainly in the 70s, there was a division between artists who thought that any artist who attempted to reclaim or restore or try to help nature were in fact helping corporations get out of they were helping them be they were helping them be irresponsible. Does anyone want to comment on this? I mean, you could either say it's really a 30-year-old polemic, or you could say, no, in fact, it's still a polemic. Is it still a polemic, this? I mean, it's interesting because, for example, Ecovention was funded by Duke Energy, and some people might have been, why are you letting a big power company fund your exhibition? It wasn't really greenwashing, but they gave us enough money to do the show, and I mean, there are examples of greenwashing, but that was not greenwashing on any level.
Well, my experience was Mobil Exxon came to maybe fund the park, but they changed their mind and funded race cars, and it's just come out. That was exactly when they made the decision you read about in the newspaper about bearing ecological issues. But I know, hey, no corporation's chasing me down. And I follow Jane Goodall around, and she won't take money from anybody that does any animal testing, and she holds corporate feet to the fire.
Right, but we're talking about
I know.
the 60s when artists were saying, if you do anything to help the situation, you're effectively helping the people that ruined the land in the first place.
I really have a hard time getting, well, okay, maybe it's irrelevant now, but, I wouldn't take something from frackers.
From what?
From fracking, unless
Okay.
they were paying me to do a model cleanup. I mean, we're in much different times. We're in very hard times. Back there in the 70s is kind of soft. I can't even think back there.
Well, if you go back to the 60s,
Yeah.
ecology was getting started, but the person that I remember very clearly was Rachel Carson, who has been credited with her Silent Spring, with her book Silent Spring, with starting the environmental movement and getting people involved in environmental issues. She managed to start a movement that within a few years ended up with the Environmental Protection Agency. A few years after that, the Environmental Protection Agency, says our eagles are dying, and we think we know why. We do know why. And we're going to do something about it. And they put a ban on DDT. So, people jump in and get involved, and the result is it's positive, and it's really carried us from the 60s on. Without that, the world would really be in a mess.
I personally, as someone who's on the outside just writing about these issues, I think that when you become an ideologue and say, oh, if you do those artists who are doing restoration are helping the corporations, there's two things that happen in my way of thinking. One is that now we're telling artists what to do. I don't see any positive outcome for telling artists what good art is and what bad art is, because last year's bad art is this year's good art, and last year's good art is this year's bad art. So I think that's a very confused approach. And secondly, I think that's something that the artists who have this ideological approach, one outcome of being rigid and saying this is bad and this is good is that, in fact, a lot of these solutions that are really interesting and that are playing a huge role commercially, whether you talk about phytoremediation from Melchin's project with the Pig Eye landfill in St. Paul. I'm just saying that artists who have had great imaginations, who have come up with interesting solutions, yes, maybe initially they're helping corporations, but they're also paving the way for a solution that the artists themselves probably, will pass on to a new group that will either be jobs that are created to do it, or someone saying to the corporations, excuse me, you have to do this, you made this mess, and you're just lucky enough that this artist has figured out how to clean it. So in my mind, making it into a polemic, I don't see any.
It's not useful.
I don't see any benefit for fighting these kinds of wars. And in fact, 10 years ago, a friend of mine and I, we went to Rome to this quarry to find the remains of asphalt rundown, which every eco-artist I knew had totally demonized. This is awful. It's a piece where Smithson took a dump truck with asphalt, and the image looks really violent. You see the black asphalt coming out into this quarry, and you just think, why on earth would an artist or anyone do this? This is horrible. And Patricia and I had been in conversation before I went to Rome, and she said, I have a suspicion it's not as bad as the other artists say it is. And in fact, what we discovered was that there was like a little green strip. It was like where the asphalt had gone, had collected seeds, and that part had germinated. That's not to say it's a good idea to dump asphalt over the side of a mountain. It's just to say that looking at images and thinking of artworks, it's much more complex than, do the right thing. It's very difficult to know. Oftentimes it's very difficult to know what the right thing is.
I'm thinking of another aspect of artists and art and ecology and the environment. Someone earlier mentioned fracking, hydraulic fracturing that's occurring up in particularly the northern tier of Pennsylvania to get natural gas out of shale. I have a friend in town. He's a Millersville emeritus professor also of art. Bob Lowing is a photographer. He's also a Quaker. And when some Quakers up in the northern tier said, we're having problems up here, why don't you come up and see what's happening? Bob went up with his camera and has taken some wonderful photographs documenting what's happening in northern PA, eastern PA, western PA, where they're doing hydraulic fracturing to show the impact on the environment. He has some wonderful large format color prints now that kind of document the impact and effect of fracking, which he's showing around. He showed them first at the Quaker meeting, which had a forum on fracking. But then just a few months ago, he had a major show at F&M, which was also, the college was leading a discussion for its students on fracking and the impact of fracking on the environment and how they might get involved. And that whole, it's about a week of activities, and the week of activities began with a show of Bob's work, about 60 photographs. And a picture is worth 1,000 words. When you see what's happening up there, you know that something has to be done.
Yeah.
So another point that comes up a lot is the formal relationships in your work, between elements and your objectives. Excuse me. Do either of you want to address that? And because they're both very visual and.
So basically, since I call myself an artist, I think at the end of the process, there does need to be a work of art. And so even though I start with the ecology, the community, the nature aspects, and then the infrastructure, all of the technical needs, in the end, I have to convert that into something sculptural and then make it, in my case, for public use. It's very important to me that people both use my work and like my work. And it's also important to me that it go on, that it's not temporary. So, I'm really, they're not monuments to myself, but I'm thinking of them more as sculptural manifestations that will be there for a very long time. And I do believe that I've managed to do that. I think I sent you the picture. Chase Bank is now using Fair Park as their iconic image for Dallas. And so when you log into Chase Bank, they have a city icons feature. In New York, it's the Brooklyn Bridge, but in Dallas, it's Fair Park. And somebody in Texas sent me that. And so what that means is it's something that people both recognize and love. And that's basically what I'm trying to create, is these permanent fixtures in communities that represent them, and also sound values. But in terms of where I want to go, because I've done enough of this now, and I'm getting older, so I'm trying to think about the bigger picture. And I work with the California Coastal Conservancy now, and I also work in Sweden. And they have something called the Commons Landscape, and I'm very interested in, in linked systems, linked water systems, linked wildlife corridors, and taking that across the whole United States, because our landscape is so fragmented. And basically, we can't have those infrastructure services without linking up all the fragments. So I'm trying now to make drawings not just of individual problems, but linking up larger systems. I don't know if that answers the question. But.
Do you want to address that question?
A little bit. Patricia answered it brilliantly. As I sort of evolve, I've gotten more and more into the essential importance of reconnecting up our water, changing our water infrastructures, and reconnecting up the waters wherever we are. They've been boxed and separated, and it's probably the single largest contradiction to climate change will be to reclaim the water and reconnect them, put capacity back in, flexibility back in. And so conceptually, I have this concept of how to bring communities together to address that collectively. And it's very related to what Patricia's been saying too, but it's also very specific to that, to the water infrastructure of any community. Your water's been piped and boxed, taken away from you, and so how to get the processes of communities getting it back, and that takes working with all the different structures. So that's where my mind's going. Ending up with a work of art, there are always places that you can pop up with a work of art there, but sometimes that might come from somebody in the community, not from me. It's a piece I always enjoy, is figuring that out. I like to make things that are very pleasing, fun to be around. Children can climb all over them. They're interactive. Everything I do, I try to do it that way. So that's it.
Does anyone have a worry that these kind of artworks are just sort of a Band-Aid and normalizing a wound as opposed to something that really can have a more longer-term effect? No?
Well, they put a whole bunch of Band-Aids together. You end up with
Yes.
something that's much more than a Band-Aid.
Well, it depends on how much initiative can be released in the process. So conceptualizing, say, something, someone may take her up on a part of it or me up on a part of it, not me, right? Like really changing what's in our brains of what's possible and what we get to do.
So one question she has is, does a focus on individual efforts undermine the need for systemic change? And I don't know whether she means like the individual efforts of an artist or the individual efforts, like a, I don't know, maybe we should move on because I'm not really sure. Individual efforts. So here's a question I think is the most important question, and we can really talk a long time about. How does one evaluate success? I just want to give a little introduction. In my EcoVenture book of 22, not 1992, I really spent a lot of time trying to say that one of the best things about artists taking on these topics is that they could succeed as an artwork
and fail as a science experiment. That doesn't mean that the artists are going to do bad science. We've talked a lot about this, about how important it is that the science works. But on the other hand, as an artist, they have a certain kind of freedom to try something that might be too daring for a scientist to do. And the best example, again, is this Melchin project with phytoremediation, where he had a hunch and the scientists had a hunch, but no one would fund it until he got an NEA grant. So does anyone want to talk about this? How does one evaluate success? I have very specific ideas, but let's start with.
I use one word.
Want to start monitoring?
Wait, I have a question. Why don't we talk about how does one evaluate success with science, and then we'll go from evaluating success in science to evaluating success.
If a work is transformative, I think that is a key test. If the land has been transformed, if a wetland has been transformed, if a city has been transformed.
Or the people's opinions.
Well, if it's transformative, they will be involved, and if it's really transformative, they will be convinced.
But it could even be that you try something 1 year and it doesn't take for 30 years, but it's transformed. It takes that long to convince people of your ideas.
So as far as the science, that's the most important thing to me. I do the art at the end, and to me, if the project doesn't work, it's a real failure. It has to work. Well, you know, it just has to, for the types of projects I do.
Okay, well, I have to learn all the science first. I have to understand the parameters of the situation. How polluted is the water? What's the volume of the water? What's the temperature changes here? Does it get very hot, very cold? What are my... So I have to learn all that first before I can figure out what's going to happen in that situation. Or, you know, often, like in the case of the Living Water Garden, I worked with the only hydraulic engineer that was fascinated by wetland science too, in all of China, happened to be on the spot. So, yeah, if the project doesn't work, it's a failure. And you know pretty fast. Pretty fast, because putting in biological systems are inherently dynamic. So, and in fact, I don't think it's rocket science. So biology, nature thrives. You put some few things in place that are okay, we'll be surprised at the result. That's the amazing thing, is that we live in this wonderfully complex biological world which we are trying to reduce down to singular things. Trees like to live together. Species like to be with each other. You just activate something that's close to workable, and it's going to amaze you. So from there on, then people start learning even more and more. But what I learned the most from is, sort of biophysics. It's fascinating to me. It's very, very fascinating to me. So, and how to translate that into community or the complexity of how we live. And so then to put together the ecosystems in which we can biologically thrive. Because if we're degrading everything, we're degrading with it. We're degrading too.
Well, I think what the artist brings to the discussion is aesthetics, an aesthetic feel for the final product. If an engineer designs a sewage treatment plant, it's going to be a pretty sterile environment. But if the sewage treatment plant does, as I saw Patricia's design do, if that feeds into a wetland, that becomes a natural environment for a whole range of plants and animals and people. That's not a sterile environment. That's an aesthetically pleasing environment. It's a welcoming environment.
But that's also a science. That's a different science of wetland treatment than what the engineer likes to see.
It is definitely a different treatment, yes.
Yeah.
But it's, to me, as a scientist, I would say it's much more aesthetically pleasing than what I would perhaps see an engineer do.
But yeah, but how will you persuade that engineer and the public? This is the issue, right? That's okay like that, that's sanitary, and that's good, and that's desirable. That's, I mean,
Well, in this case, the state of California would weigh in.
yeah.
And I've done 2 sewage treatment facilities, one that I showed, and then before that, I did a sewer for the city of San Francisco that I designed, which is a totally different type of system. It's actually a transport storage sewer. And that project was initiated when the city was being sued $25,000 a day by the EPA for dumping raw sewage into the bay during wet weather overflows. And so the Department of Public Works had designed a project, and they had one site, which was right along Candlestick Cove, right on the bay. And they couldn't get it permitted because the Bay Conservation Development Commission wouldn't allow it to be built, the environmental organization. And so I had just an art show of drawings, of title drawings, about a year prior in San Francisco. And so I got a call from a woman at the Arts Commission who had seen the show, and she said, I saw your show about a year ago, and I have a funny question for you. And I said, what? She said, would you be willing to design a sewer? And I said, absolutely. And so she said, can you come out tomorrow? Because they were getting this fine. And so I did, and I said to the engineers who were not welcoming, I said, don't worry, I will not fool with your work. I will just make it so that people like it and get it permitted. And so basically, I took everything that they had done and basically designed it as part of, this project went through 3 jurisdictions too. It went from Candlestick Point State Recreation Area, which was a California state park. Then it went into City and County of San Francisco property. And then, because it went all around the cove, it crossed the border and went into City and County of San Bruno. And so basically, we had 3 different jurisdictions. But by designing it, by basically putting the sewer down so that the roof could become a bay walk, making it all part of a trail, then taking the head of the San Francisco garter snake, making that 20 feet high, which is actually like about three stories, 3-story building. We were able to bring all the butterflies back because they couldn't fly in the crosswinds between the bay winds and then the Pacific coast coming through the coast range from the Pacific Ocean. And so basically I found all of my constituencies. I went to the California Academy of Sciences. I worked with all the bird people, the butterfly people, so that you give people a vested interest in your project. And they all thought it was wonderful because now they have territory where they can showcase their pet projects. And basically what happened was, after this design, it's basically the endangered San Francisco garter snake. And basically, it's going down there. There's tidal sculpture that goes down to the floor of the bay, which is about 2 stories below what's really the sewer. But people don't realize it is. It's now part of the Bay Circuit Trail. It's part of a California state park. And people they have no clue about what it really is. And so that was a kind of miraculous project for me, because it was my first really big, a municipal flood basin is easy, but a sewer is a bit more complex. And at that point, I knew I could really deal with these matters, and we got all of our permits. I mean, when it had to be presented to the Army Corps of Engineers, I went down. Whenever there were public hearings, I presented the projects. The engineers were in the background. Basically, they would get questions like, will it smell? And then they'd stand up and say, no, we have a carbon filtration system. It won't smell. And then the people in the audience says, well, all your other ones do. but this project really worked well. And they never announced publicly that there was percent for art money in the project. That's how they paid me. Because they thought there would be a great hue and cry for art money going into a sewer. And so,
You're right. They were
Yeah.
right, yeah.
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 So it's just there.
Yeah.
You know, it never got any publicity or anything. It's just there.
Well, I think it's interesting because you say that how important it is that the projects work, because I know of a couple cases, in particular, Lynn Hull's monkey trail that was in Ecovention, and she was very upset with me for including it because she felt like for her it was a failure, but what I wanted to do was describe why it was a failure. It wasn't really her fault. She was working with a biologist, and the biologist had to go back to the States, and so she finished it, and probably it's a great example. Had she had more input from the biologist, she might have worked on it differently. But on the flip side, she did a project in West Texas, which no one thought would work, when she was installing raptor roosts, and no one knew whether the raptors would come to it, and the Texas wildlife biologists in West Texas were surprised by the effect. So I think that even if artists say they want their work to work, I think they have to also take the risk, because a lot of these things are, I know in your case you always talk about how like you're spending so much money you can't really afford to not have them work, but in some smaller cases where the artists can be more experimental, and we might again say it's a success as an artwork, but maybe not success as science or something like that. I don't know. I think evaluating success, a lot of times also I think what's interesting is, you brought up aesthetics. I think that sometimes there's no doubt in my mind that we need cues for care. It's not my term, it's a term of a landscape architect. Cues for care, so people know that it's been designed to look a particular way, but sometimes these ecological systems are actually really messy, and they don't look super beautiful, or they don't, they change their stability. Maybe they go in and out of phase or in phase. So it's risky to use aesthetics as some kind of marker for success, I think. Does anyone want to? Okay, I'm going to make the bold claim that it's risky to always use aesthetics as a marker of success, with the view that I might provoke a counter discussion.
You vote for me because I think aesthetics are, they're personal, they're arbitrary, and some people like it messy, and some people like it neat. And I personally like it to be alive. I don't really, I want it to be alive.
But
And
it's-
if it's messy or neat.
Yeah, it's also beauty is in the eye of the
Exactly.
That's what
beholder.
she's saying.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is about changing people's vision of what's acceptable. If the prevailing view is that you need a green lawn, basically you have to show them something different. And maybe you show them in a transitional way. So for example, you plant your native plants, which people might consider weedy, but then you mow them into patterns.
Right, and those would be the cues for
Yes.
care. The cues for care.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. But I think a lot of it is about retraining our vision of what's acceptable and what isn't.
Right, and understanding why certain things are needed that we thought were unneeded. It's funny because I am a Texan, and I remember when Lady Bird Johnson told us that we should like wildflowers, and my mother doesn't have any memory of wildflowers being demonized. She's like, Sue, you're crazy. We always loved the bluebonnets. I'm like, no, we didn't. And I think that there was a time when cultivated flowers were always preferred over wildflowers, and that if it was wild, it couldn't have value. And one of the things that's really interesting to me looking back at Lady Bird Johnson's vision in the 60s, was that not only did she think that we should have a greater appreciation for our wildflowers, but she had a notion not just of aesthetics, but ecosystem functioning. And she really was pushing, look, we live in a desert, we live in Texas, we can have greater ecosystem functioning. They didn't call them native plants, but of course the wildflowers. And that must have been so radical for her to be thinking that way. But what I think is interesting is how sort of 40 years later, no one can remember when wildflowers were demonized, and when all the seed companies and garden stores had really the upper hand. I have to remember, it's like a multi-billion-dollar industry in our country, and that's part of the reason why we like cultivated flowers in our garden.
We had to dig up the dandelions in our lawn.
Oh, as a kid, you mean?
Yeah.
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 Right. Okay. So this is
In
part
Washington,
of this.
D.C., yeah. Okay.
In Houston, I always think it's funny because, well, Houston's kind of like a tropical rainforest. Did you get that sense when you were there? It's very green. And there's some leading renegade people in the wealthiest neighborhoods in Houston who've decided not to do anything to their lawn or their gardens. And they think they're being renegades, but of course the wealthy people living next to them think they're a disaster. But there's more and more, I noticed this time driving around downtown Houston, there's more and more of these renegade people, and I don't really know the origin of their what's motivating them, just whether they're lazy or whether they have a vision. It's difficult to tell. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see how these kinds of, the future of the front yard is going to be very interesting in the next 20 to 30 years as people stop using water and put a sheep in their front yard to do the mowing instead of a lawnmower or something. I mean, I already see this happening. I mean, there's hardly a park anymore that doesn't have a sheep to do the mowing. I don't know.
All over LA, they're using sheeps.
In LA too,
Yeah,
okay.
Yep.
So, do you guys, maybe that's a project, you can get a
That's
sheep.
natural in China,
Yeah.
goats and the sheep.
Anyway, I think that at this point it'd be really great if we had questions from the audience, because we've been talking about things that, okay, go ahead.
What advice do the panelists have for students, budding eco artists? Where do they begin, from the science end or the art end? Because they gotta have a passion, I'm assuming, before you get into the art, eco art itself.
I don't know, I think the campus is the perfect laboratory and ask them to figure out a project and go find the right scientist and learn it and go through the permissions and see if it makes sense to do it.
Well, the thing that's really interesting to me is that every artist has a different solution or a different angle to every situation. So you could just, if you just identified one spot, a small spot, 50 feet by 50 feet, and said, what's the problem here and how should we handle it, every student would come up with a different, they'd focus on a different thing, and once they focus on a different thing, then they'd have to find the resources to collaborate. You know, if they thought, you know, what? And that's something I've learned from working with artists, is that they all will argue about what the problem is. And that's really healthy, because that shows already how complex these situations are. Someone focuses on water, someone focuses on habitat, someone focuses on biodiversity, someone focuses on soil reclamation, whatever. But find a spot and start a discussion, and each of them will have to find their partners to prove what they think is the solution.
I taught at a college in Iowa for 24 years, and one of the most successful learning experiences that I observed there was a competition every year where a group of students got together to solve a problem. And this was done at the state level, so the problem was stated, here's the problem, and then college kids came in from all around to present their solution. And the most effective solutions were presented by groups of students, not by individuals, but by groups of students who got together the most diverse collection of people you could imagine, but always artists, usually scientists, business people, and they attacked the problem in a very interdisciplinary way and attacked it very successfully. And that's what I've seen these two women doing with their projects. They have an interdisciplinary team, and it finds a solution.
Yep.
Yeah.
Turn them loose.
Okay, go ahead, Lena. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, okay, go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure I heard your question that well, but okay, the people that I have most trouble with are engineers. And the reason is my approach to engineering is so different than theirs. But basically, you just have to convince people of your point of view. And in order to do that, you need to have sound thinking. In all of these multidisciplinary projects, multifunctional projects, you as the designer need to know all the parts. You need to know the languages of every discipline out there. You have to be able to dialogue with them and convince them of your point of view. Other than that, then you're just using them as consultants. You're going to them and saying, how do I do this? In my view, it's more important for you to understand how all the parts work so that you can make people come around to your point of view. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
It's helpful, but I think that I find it's a daunting process then of understanding all the different parts, all the different processes, and being able to speak accurately to all of the parts. But yeah, I think it can be very important, and it's just part of the challenge of these types of projects.
Go ahead.
You know, in the end, it always comes down to who's in charge.
I think you're right, because the person in charge is going to be, if you have strong personalities and people are stepping on people's toes, the person in charge has to somehow say, back off. And
Yeah, and that's why with the title of artist, you're technically the weak link. And so that's why I'll only design projects where I am in charge.
Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
learned how to speak to engineers, I've learned how to speak to scientists, sometimes so much so that they're shocked, like, what are you, how do you know this stuff? So I had to develop that skill in order to be believable and to make relationships. And and yeah, it's really important to be in charge. That's not always easy, but people are coming. Say, if a landscape company comes to me and they want an artist on the project, I often have a hard time being in at the beginning of the design process, and if I can't be in the beginning of the design process, I don't want to be on the project, because that means I have almost no say in how it's going to go down. And a lot of times with big companies, they don't want to share all the information. And I need to know everything in order to design it right. I need to listen, to research, to know it, to do it well. So, and that I consider part of my job, a big part of the job.
I want to just say this before you ask your question. I think the thing that people don't really realize about the art world, I think we have this image that artists are autonomous and it's not very collaborative, but in fact, everything the artist ever does is collaborative. Even, once he or she steps outside the studio. And so I think that probably early on you guys have developed these kind of working skills. You're either working with gallerists or curators or other artists, or, the first thing young artists are doing is setting up group shows with each other and figuring out who's going to bring this and what space you're going to have and this and that. So I think that we have this idea of artists as being autonomous, but in fact they've been developing collaborative skills from college days, because everything they do really involves groups, even though the artist gets the artist is assigned the credit, but in fact it's always a group activity. So the kinds of things that you're concerned about, I think people have a great familiarity with. I think you're right to be concerned about all these different egos, but probably every 22-year-old artist has complained about 3 or 4 of the artists in their group and said, oh, they're trying to dominate the whole show, and then they figure out how to get those dominating people to have less power or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Is that, whatever. Okay, so what happened? Oh, there you are. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by the idea of a college campus as a laboratory for eco-art. But I think that our laboratories on most university campuses are very tightly controlled by the faculty.
Or the facilities department?
Pardon?
The facilities department.
Yes, I was gonna say.
Not the faculty, but the facilities department.
So I think that most college campuses, the campus layout, the physical layout, the landscape, is probably pretty close to the suburban
Yeah,
green lawn.
exactly.
And so if we're gonna, open up the laboratory to students and let them, I mean, I was intrigued, so, okay, you have a little spot, so okay, here's a problem. We're probably paying $25,000 a day for a crisis that we can't see. We don't see the urgency of converting our landscape, I don't think. So I guess
Amen.
I'm curious to know if there's other colleges and universities that have successfully navigated a really authentic, open laboratory for students to solve problems.
I only know of George Mason in Fairfax, Virginia.
You said Mason?
George Mason in Fairfax, they have the Green Studio. I can't remember what it's called, the School of Art I guess it's the Permaculture Studio. It used to be the Green Studio, but they changed it to the Permaculture Studio. And they have Mark Cooley, who's their, intermediate teacher. He teaches everything from game design to urban farming. And in the fall, he teaches urban farming. Maybe in the fall he teaches eco art. In the spring, he teaches urban farming. But the point being that they have a space set aside where the students are in control of this kind of space. They're not renovating the campus. And in fact, this summer, there was a little bit, the whole thing was in jeopardy when the sustainable department and the facility department got a little confused about what they were doing there. But it seems to me that these days, every university also has a sustainable department, a department of sustainability. And those are the people that you want to get on board. You want to say, hey, you're spending all this much money. We have these students who want to research a possible solution. Can you just carve off a piece of the campus that can be theirs? Just the way Yale has an urban farm. I mean, more and more universities have their own urban farms, and students are doing work-study working in the urban farm. So maybe you could do a work-study program, take it really seriously, and they know what space has been allocated. Get a contract, because that's what George Mason, they made a mistake. They had a verbal agreement. But you want to have a written contract or a written agreement so that everyone has a document.
Yeah, and I just want to add one quick thing to that. In the case of George Mason, it's not just Mark Cooley, the art guy,
Right.
but it's also Chang Ruan, the science guy.
Oh, that's good.
And so they work together.
Might I suggest to you that you meet Dave Dobbins, who's a botanist, and he's a retired botanist from Millersville. And David will walk you around the Millersville campus and show you how the campus was designed, much of it, as a laboratory for the biologists to use. You have a wooded area, you have streams, you have, in the middle of the science building, you have a botanical culture that I think David largely designed, and it was designed to support education. And I think a lot of colleges and universities actually do this now. It's not a novel idea, but it's a good idea.
I think Pomona Scripps has some dedication. I think Virginia, Richmond, Virginia, whatever they have, I know some things.
Actually, University of New Mexico, because didn't Basha design something there for the university?
She may have. And even the place I was complaining about, Albion, has a new Leeds building that collects all their water and has some rain garden. And I did get them to do one other rain garden. So it is starting. The students do these things. But I think to get students involved in it, and also the whole idea of how much of the resource on your campus could you reuse, recycle? What would be the savings there? If people could understand that, because that translates right into homes and all kinds of ways that you take it out and start talking about that. I mean, we are a very profligate society, and that absolutely must change. Yes?
So, in response, I'll challenge students. We still have students here? Students. For class, I don't know. Those students that are here,
and then the webinar I just did.
Have a conservancy project that we're finishing, and your students did that roof pull-off for us. So that's, I live up the street, so that's community urban situation.
John Wallace, Dr. Wallace, Chris Hardy are working on that.
College can lead the way from Millville.
Great. What were we going to say?
The college can lead the way from Millville, but I just did a webinar that, on examples of rainwater collection and everything. I have about 150 whatever. I can give PowerPoint to some.
Okay, well, are there any more questions? It's almost 9 o'clock. I thank everyone for coming, and thank you for inviting us to share our information.